Well, this isn't creepy at all. Oh, shit. Shit. Fuck. Shit. Ah, damn it. Ah, that's right. You suck it, you stabby ass dwarf ass bitch. Happy New Year, buttholes. It's Rufus, and I am a huge fan of survival horror games. These drop you into scary situations full of terrifying monsters, but unlike most video games, give you little or no way to defend yourself. Instead, you simply have to survive, and try not to piss your pants in the process. This makes an interesting contrast to action games where you're typically playing a big badass with a bunch of guns mowing down hordes of bad guys. In survival horror, you're usually just an average Joe who has found their way into a totally fucked up situation, and rather than heroically saving the day, your main goal is just to make it out alive. This usually involves exploring, solving puzzles, evading various horrifying creatures, and sparingly using what few defenses you may find to stay alive. And the horror elements are much more effective because you know the odds are stacked against you. Simply put, these games are fucking scary. Now, the game that first defined and popularized survival horror was the best-selling 1996 release Resident Evil, about a special ops team that find themselves trapped in a mansion full of fucked up monsters and low on ammo. The gameplay focused more on puzzle solving and survival than combat, and quickly became the new gold standard in scaring the shit out of players. But the seeds of the genre had already been sown by many games that came before it, which tasked the player with surviving scary situations using brains rather than brawn. And the game I'm going to talk about today is certainly one of the forefathers, but has gone sadly unnoticed in much of the gaming community. Clock Tower. No, not the 1996 PlayStation game, that was actually the sequel. I'm talking about the very first game in the series, the OG. Clock Tower for the Super Nintendo. Damn, those are some spooky-ass pixels. Let's dive right in. Alright, let's fast forward here. The game's called fucking Clock Tower, we get it. In Clock Tower, you play a teenage orphan named Jennifer, who has recently been adopted along with 3 of her little orphan buddies by the mysterious Burroughs family. We begin the game with the kids being led through the woods by their teacher Mary on their way to their new home at the Burroughs estate, which, of course, is a massive, creepy old mansion isolated deep in the woods and featuring a giant, spooky clock tower, and all of the horror red flags go up at once. Your party arrives safely at the mansion, but nobody seems to be home, so Mary goes off to find the owner of the house while you all chill out in the giant foyer. You pass the time chatting to your homies Anne, the brunette girl, Laura, the blonde girl, and Lottie, aka redhead girl, because who really cares what their names are? You know they're all about to fucking die anyway. After a while, when nobody has returned, you volunteer to go off and find Mary, and that's when the spooky shit starts. Suddenly, all of your friends have disappeared and you're all alone, trapped in what is clearly a haunted mansion, and this is where the real meat of the game begins, as you explore the freaky house in an attempt to find your friends and escape. For the most part, Clock Tower is a classic point-and-click adventure game. You control Jennifer using the cursor, clicking on where you want her to walk, and selecting things for her to look at or use. You can only walk freely left and right, but if you click on a usable object behind her, she'll walk back to it, allowing you to explore the mansion as if it were a 3D space. There's lots of interactive shit lying around which you can use to reach new areas, uncover hidden secrets, and find hard-to-reach items. You can even use the light switches if you're scared of the dark, but of course, they're always broken in the creepy-ass rooms. There are also lots of useful items you can pick up, most of which seem totally random at the time, but they all come in handy later to solve puzzles and progress through the game, so go ahead and grab anything you find. Jennifer's able to hold a surprisingly large inventory in her little dress pockets. Many items are hidden in really obscure places, so follow standard point-and-click procedure and click on goddamn everything. Twice. The good news is that this isn't one of those adventure games where you have 1,000 fucking useless inventory items and you're constantly stuck trying every item on everything because you have no way of knowing what the fuck the game wants you to do, aka Monkey Island syndrome. Everything in Clock Tower has a pretty clear purpose, and there are cryptic clues scattered throughout the game to give you hints as to where you're supposed to go, what you're supposed to do, and even where to find certain items. It's fairly challenging, but I never found myself totally stuck. But we've talked about the adventure gameplay enough. Now let's look at the fun stuff. The horror. After all, this is a horror game, and as you make your way around the mansion, all kinds of spooky shit happens. There's paranormal activity and jump scares galore, most of which is just for atmosphere, but some of it will straight up kill your ass. Game over, bitch. Most of this is just harmless spookiness though, or can be pretty easily defeated, like this evil fucking parrot. Fuck that parrot. But the truly terrifying enemy in this game is motherfucking Scissor Man. As you explore the spooky mansion, you will occasionally be greeted by a fucked up mutant child with a giant pair of scissors, who appears to have a thing for murdering teenage girls since he proceeds to kill all of your little orphan friends one by one as the game progresses. And this guy loves to jump out randomly without warning in various locations throughout the mansion. As soon as Scissor Man is on screen, the whole game changes from a point-and-click adventure to straight-up survival horror. You're no longer able to pick up items or progress through the story. Your only goal becomes escaping death at the hands of Stabby McStabstab. You can run around the mansion all you want, but Scissor Man will constantly reappear and try and kill you until you manage to get rid of him. Since you have no weapons, you do this by finding a hiding place where he can't see you, and there's a variety of these scattered throughout the house. There's also a couple ways you can temporarily trap him and get away. They aren't always obvious at first, and some can only be reached while you're being chased, so it's important to remember the last safe space you found in case Scissor Man shows up again. Also be aware that some of the safe spots don't always work in certain cases. For example, if there's an evil fucking parrot in the room. Seriously, fuck that parrot. Only when Scissor Man can't find you will the little bastard give up and fuck off, at which point the game switches back to being a normal point-and-click adventure and you can continue making progress. If he catches you before you find a hiding place, you can fight him, kind of. When he attacks, your portrait on the bottom left will flash, indicating for you to mash your panic button to try and fight him off. That's right, this game has fucking QuickTime events. And not just for Scissor Man, basically anytime you're attacked by anything. But in this case, they make sense and work pretty well within the gameplay. You can't kill Scissor Man with your puny panic button, but you can push him over and get a chance to run away. But you also need to be careful not to run for too long because it raises your panic level, which is something else we need to talk about. This game doesn't have health for your character. Instead, your level of fear is indicated by your portrait changing colors from blue for calm to red for totally freaked the fuck out. Your panic level rises when you tire yourself out by running for too long, and if Scissor Man catches you fully freaked out, your panic button won't work at all and he can kill you instantly. It's a good thing the game automatically saves every time you enter a room because you'll be doing a lot of dying. Fortunately, it's pretty easy to lower your panic level. If you're in a safe area, just stop moving and Jennifer will sit down for a bit to rest and calm down, which sounds boring as hell, but it really only takes a few seconds. And that pretty much sums it up. Explore, solve puzzles, don't get murdered, repeat. Clock Tower was super innovative at the time because of its unique mix of classic adventure game mechanics and terrifying survival horror elements, so let's take a moment to give the developers some props. Human Entertainment was a Japanese company founded in 1987 that developed a shitload of different games of every imaginable genre for every console under the sun, but never really had any blockbuster hits and had to shut their doors back in 2000. They were responsible for quite a few cult classic horror games, such as Monster Party, which I did a video on if you want to check it out, as well as the Twilight Syndrome series. But Clock Tower was their first real attempt to make a truly terrifying game, and it was very experimental for the time. It's hard to imagine now, with the amount of spooky titles coming out of Japan every year, but back in 1995, survival horror games weren't even really a thing yet. One of Human Entertainment's game designers, Hifumi Kono, was inspired to make a scary game after seeing the films of renowned horror director Dario Argento, particularly the movie Phenomena, which just so happens to be about a dark-haired, fair-skinned teenage girl named Jennifer, who gets sent off to a creepy girls' boarding school deep in the woods, which turns out to be a very, very stabby place indeed. There's even a killer mutant child. Any of this sound familiar? Also, this sequence from Dario Argento's Suspiria rings a bell for some reason. Can't quite put my finger on it though. So, a Japanese game designer decided to pay homage to an Italian horror director by making a Super Nintendo game. Why the fuck not? Hifumi Kono was given a small team and a limited budget to develop his experimental idea, and they created Clock Tower, which ended up being fairly successful in Japan, at least enough to generate a few sequels, but sadly was never released in the Western world, most likely due to Nintendo of America's heavy-handed censorship rules regarding violence. To this day, the original Clock Tower remains a Japan exclusive. Now, the really confusing shit was when Clock Tower 2 came out for PlayStation the following year. It was released in the West, because Sony don't give a fuck about some blood and gore, but in the English-speaking world who had never played the original game, it was released as just Clock Tower, leading many gamers to assume it was an entirely original story and then to be confused about what the fuck all the characters were talking about.
Helen, the Clock Tower murders are fascinating research material for me.
But that's a tale for another time. The original Clock Tower was a genre-bending experiment that paid off, an innovative, scary adventure that led to a successful franchise and paved the way for all of the survival horror games that followed it. So let's get to the review. First and foremost, this game has a great horror atmosphere on all fronts, visuals, sound, and gameplay. The 16-bit art of the Super Nintendo era is a little crude, but they did a damn good job at making the creepy evil mansion look like a creepy evil mansion. And it's definitely not a comfortable place to explore with the lights off. Furthermore, the way the game is paced makes the scares, well, actually scary. Like, for the first few minutes of the game, you're just stuck in the foyer, waiting for your teacher. All you can do is chat with your friends, and it seems to take forever until Lottie, the redhead, suggests someone go and look for her. At this point, you, as a player, just like the girls in the game, are just plain bored. So when super creepy shit starts to go down immediately afterwards, it's jarring. And the point-and-click adventure parts of the game are slow. A lot of quietly walking around looking for stuff with no music whatsoever, only the sounds of your own footsteps to keep you company. Or mysterious, creepy-ass noises. Which makes it a huge contrast when something actually happens. This is probably the only 16-bit game that's ever made me jump. And when Scissor Man pops out, you're suddenly in survival mode and the eerie music starts up. Yep, it's pants-shitting time. Speaking of which, the music in this game is fucking excellent, and another homage to Dario Argento, who frequently employed a band called Goblin to give his movies freaky, synthesized soundtracks. The game follows this style, with every encounter accompanied by a memorably creepy synth score, courtesy of composer Kouji Nukura. These here are some badass spoopy jams. This game also has a ton of replay value. There's a total of 9 possible endings you can get depending on your actions in the game, and for the most part, they aren't just slight variations on each other, but drastically different outcomes for the characters. Like really early in the game, you find a car parked in the garage with the key sitting nearby. On my first playthrough, I thought, fuck yeah, let's just drive the hell out of here. Of course, Jennifer voices concern about her friends, but I just made her start up the car and drive away anyway. Fuck all that stabby shit, I'm out of here. And, to my surprise, the game indeed lets you just drive the fuck away from the whole situation immediately, and then the credits start rolling. Easiest game ever, right? Until... And that, my friends, is a crash course on how to get the absolute lowest ranked ending in the game. Fuck me, right? Fortunately, it's really easy to start a new game. There's even a quick start option that lets you skip all the introductory crap and jump right into the scary stuff. And I was surprised to find that the game had changed on my second time around. Turns out, every time you start a new run, the locations of the rooms in the mansion move around, as do some of the items you need to collect, so you never get the exact same game twice. Some of the scares randomly change as well, so you can't be exactly sure what's going to happen in a certain room even if you've explored it before. It keeps the gameplay interesting enough that you're inclined to play through it several times to try and get the best ending. There's even an endings list with all possible outcomes ranked best to worst to keep you collecting. Another thing that kept me coming back for more was the story. Now, it's totally possible to play through the game, get one of the shittier endings, and know nothing about the larger story besides that it was a creepy-ass haunted house. However, as you make progress towards any of the better endings, you gradually learn bits and pieces about the backstory of the Burroughs family and why there's all this scary shit happening, and it's compelling as hell. Without giving away too many spoilers, you find out that Mary is actually an evil bitch and is part of all the stabbiness. There's some fucked up business involving demon babies being born. Jennifer being here isn't random, she actually has a connection to the house. Some kind of creepy secret devil worship has been going on, and there are caves hidden under the mansion where you find some crazy shit. Some really crazy shit. And that's not even the ending. But this game is far from perfect, and there are a few nagging issues plaguing the gameplay. First of all, the controls are pretty weak. This is a point-and-click game, yet it has no mouse support, no pointer or clicker. Instead, you use the arrow keys on the controller to move the cursor around and the A button to select things. This may not seem like a big deal to you, but as someone who grew up playing point-and-click adventures on the PC, holding a button and waiting for the cursor to slowly move across the screen just feels clunky, as opposed to quickly moving the mouse over to what you want to click on. And I know what you're thinking. Of course there's no mouse support, it was a Super Nintendo game. False. The Super Nintendo had a mouse, and there were a shitload of games that supported it too. Hifumi Kono even said they intended the game to have mouse support, but had to cut out the feature to stay within the budget. But Rufus, I hear you say, your gameplay videos look like you're using a mouse. Well, that's because I'm not actually playing the Super Nintendo version of the game. I'm playing the PlayStation re-release called Clock Tower: The First Fear. Haha, that's right, I tricked you, I'm a fraud! Well, actually the PlayStation version is nearly identical to the original. They've made some slight improvements to the graphics and the audio, but nothing super noticeable. It still looks and sounds basically the same as the Super Nintendo. The only major difference is that they've included a few extra scares that were meant to be in the original game but had to be left out. So you can pretty much think of this version as the director's cut. They also finally got to include mouse support as originally intended, because yes, before you ask, the PlayStation did also have a mouse. Now I've played both versions of the game and can confirm they're almost identical, so the option to use a mouse was really a no-brainer. You might not care as much, but the clunky controller action kinda killed the gameplay for me. Another issue is that this game is slow. Anytime crazy scary shit isn't going down, you're just walking quietly around the house. And Jennifer walks so goddamn slow. As I said earlier, a lot of this is intentional to lull you into a false sense of calm between scares, but by your second playthrough, you're already bored of it. Most of the time, I ended up just running to my next destination and then resting off the panic when I got there because it was much faster. But you can only run left and right. As soon as you have to interact with something in the background, you slow back down to a crawl, even if you're being chased by Scissor Man at the time. And don't even get me started on how slow you walk up and down stairs. Ah, shoot me. Also, it annoyed me that so much of the outcome of the game was determined by seemingly random actions. For example, to get the very best ending, you need to save one of your friends from Scissorman. But that's almost impossible because causing them to die is as simple as walking into the wrong room at the wrong time. Particularly Anne, the brunette. I swear, every other time I walked into a new area, this bitch would die. She would be the worst friend in a horror movie situation. Thanks, Anne. Now you've gone and fucked up the good ending again, and I've got to reload. Fucking Anne. And finally, the game is kinda short. The first time through it may take you a couple hours to find the end of the game, but once you know the basics, you can play through this thing in like 20 minutes. All that replay value helps a bit, but the mansion does feel like it should be way bigger, and there are a few spots where it looks like you should be able to keep walking, but Jennifer just sorta stops. I've read that the developers originally planned for the house to have many more rooms, but again got cut short by a limited budget, and it shows. So the game is flawed, but it definitely makes up for that with how immersive it is, especially for a super pixelated Super Nintendo game, as well as how innovative the hybrid gameplay was. So I've got to give this one 7 dead orphans out of 10. It may not be for everyone, but if you're a fan of old school horror games, you have to check it out. So how do you go about playing it on a modern system? Clock Tower was released in 1995 as a cartridge for the Super Nintendo, or as it's known in Japan, the Super Famicom. It was later re-released for PlayStation, which is actually the version I prefer due to it being the director's cut with mouse support and bonus scary shit. It was also ported to PC, although this version had really shitty graphics, and also for the WonderSwan, which was basically a Game Boy knockoff, and this version has even shittier graphics. The Super Nintendo and PlayStation versions were digitally re-released on the Nintendo Virtual Console and PlayStation Network respectively. However, the bad news is that literally all of these releases are Japan only. It's never been released in any form in the English-speaking world. Now the good news is that nerds have, as usual, saved the day. Fans have translated the Super Nintendo, PlayStation, and PC versions into English. I'm gonna recommend tracking down a copy of the PlayStation release, which you can find on eBay for like $20, or find floating around on the high seas. Then download and apply the English translation patch and play it using a PlayStation emulator like I did. There are a bunch of these out there. Personally, I prefer ePSXe, which lets you play your old PlayStation games on Windows, Mac, Linux, and Android. There's also RetroArch, which lets you emulate a bunch of old consoles, including PlayStation, on a wide variety of systems, including iOS, Nintendo Switch, and Xbox One. Ironically, pretty much the only console you can't play this game on is the PlayStation 4, because Sony are a bunch of dicks. I've included links below where you can find all this good shit, so you can take a little trip back in time and explore the spooky pixel murder house to your heart's content. Oh shit. Ah, fucking cat. Till next time, more cheers, more beers, man, that's it, that's all.